Good evening. My name is Kayla Peters. I am the Outreach and Event Coordinator for the Kensington Falls Church. On behalf of the Kensington, we thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Kensington Falls Church is an assisted living and memory care community located in the heart of Falls Church, Virginia. Our enhanced programs enable us to deliver care beyond what the traditional senior living community can deliver. We are open for tours. We look forward to listening to your needs. Now, let us review a few housekeeping rules for this evening. We are using Zoom webinar format, so your videos and microphones will be off. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature or the chat feature to submit them, which we will present to our speakers during the Q&A portion of the event. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening. We are fortunate to be joined by Director of Strategic Partnerships with Capital City Nurses, Dolores Appy. Dolores is a healthcare professional with a true heart for advocacy. Prior to entering the field of senior services, Dolores spent 19 years working in a youth advocacy role, assisting underserved communities bridge the gap between home and school. After personal family struggles with dementia, she was drawn to helping others dealing with similar elder care challenges. Her passion is to truly educate her clients on resources, services, and strategies to manage and overcome struggles in caregiving, which she has put into motion over several years as she has counseled countless families in the fields of home care and senior living. Dolores runs the Continuum of Care program for Capital City Nurses covering Virginia, Maryland, DC, and Delaware. Please join me in welcoming Dolores Appy.
Good evening. I cannot get my camera on, but Kayla, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I appreciate the time being here. Once we get the cameras going, then we'll go ahead and introduce our panelists for this evening that are joining us. I'll ask each one of them to introduce themselves and say a few words. So while we're working on the screens on the background, let's go ahead and start with some introductions. Dave, why don't you start?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Maisel. I'm with Protore Law, and I am a trust and estates attorney. So I help people with their wills and trusts and powers of attorney and healthcare directives and things like that. I also help people when they have an estate, for someone that's passed away that they need to handle and administer and get settled. I guess I've been practicing law for over 25 years, and my office is in Tyson's Corner, and I'm licensed in Virginia, DC, and Maryland.
Thank you so much. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
So did you say John?
Yes.
I didn't hear you. I apologize. Yeah, my name is John Bennett, and I'm with the Even Group over at Merrill Lynch. I've been in the financial services field since March of 1986. And I was around when we first had long-term care come out. Worked with seniors. I've had a sister and I've had parents that have gone through this. And we just work with individuals and families to help them plan for the future so that when the unexpected happens, such as a care event, that they're prepared for it. So I've been doing it for almost 40 years.
Thank you. And Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia Fonseca. I'm with Atlantic Coast Mortgage, and I work with Team McNaughton. We are reverse mortgage specialists. What we do is we help families tackle some of the financial challenges of retirement and health crises.
Perfect. And as Kayla had said, I'm Dolores Appy Clearfield. I am with Capital City Nurses, and we are one of the largest home care providers in the Mid-Atlantic. We provide personal care as well as private duty nursing throughout Virginia, Maryland, DC, and Delaware. We work collectively through our continuum of care program to make sure that we complete care plans for our patient census to keep them safe and in the least restrictive environment wherever they choose to call home. So we'll go ahead and get started as Kayla is working on the video. When we're talking through financial options in relation to senior living, what are some of the options that we can use to pay for either an assisted living placement or a nursing home placement, and kind of pros and cons of each? John, let's go ahead and start with you on that question.
Sure. Thanks, Dolores. In order just to try to keep this within a very short and the short version of the answer, there's several ways to pay for it. One of it obviously is out of your own pocket. Okay. If we've got people in this area that have pretty large pensions. They have, maybe some Social Security benefits coming in, but they have some annuity income coming in, but they have enough income. I've had plenty of clients of mine that have plenty of income coming in that they can pay for it out of pocket. You also can look for other resources. I know that Alicia later on will be talking about reverse mortgages, being able to use your house to be able to provide some income to help cover some of the expenses. You also can, after you, in addition to income, you could have maybe some investments. Maybe you've had investments you've saved over time, whether it be brokerage accounts or IRA accounts, and you can utilize those. That's what my mom did. They had saved a lot of money when she went into a memory care facility. She had enough to be able to take care of her needs for the 26 months that she was confined. And ultimately, if those run out, there are some government options. I know that David will be talking about that later on, but you can, if you spend down enough and you're out of personal assets, there's the Medicaid option that could come into play. Obviously the benefit of the first one of being able to afford it on your own is, you can pick and choose the place you want to go. If you go to the Medicaid option, you pretty much have to go to a Medicaid facility, and there's some real restrictions that can happen with that depending upon availability. The con of paying it out of your own is that your kids are going to watch your fortune. They're going to watch their inheritance go down the drain, but that's what you saved it for. Okay, so again, it's there. But the point being is that if you use that, you're depending on your own assets, you may end up with hardly nothing. And if there's a what I call the community spouse, maybe one spouse that's healthy and the other one's not, it could cause some real impacts to them. And then of course you have the insurance option. If you're still can qualify for it, to be able to go and purchase insurance, you can have long-term care, and there's lots of variations of that nowadays. Not just to what's called traditional long-term care, but there's some hybrid policies. There's some life insurance that'll provide some benefits that you can get. And again, the advantages there is that you're able to have the insurance company pay the expense technically for a fraction of what it would be if you were paying it $4 for dollar out of your own pocket. And, the drawback is depending upon the kind of policy you have, they can be expensive. Things have changed in the industry where premiums have changed unexpectedly. So you have to prepare for those kind of things. But it does give you the ability to go and preserve wealth that you've accumulated over the years, and hopefully be able to pass that down.
So, and as we utilize long-term care insurance, what I remember is that you need to be cognizant of the elimination periods, and if there is a dollar maximum amount on the policy or a time length, correct?
That is correct, because when you go set up a long-term care policy, you're going to pick an elimination period. Usually 90 days is common, but you can go out longer if you want. And it does have a length of time when it'll eventually, when the funds will go and they'll run out. You definitely want to make sure you have an inflation guard, because when you buy one of these policies, maybe a nursing home is $100,000 today, but maybe you won't need it for 20 years down the road. And if you only have 100,000 worth of benefit and you need 200 or 250 because of what's happened with inflation, it's critical that you have that addressed.
Gotcha. Okay. And now one of the questions that I received quite often was people wanting to know what were the tax, was there a tax break, or is an assisted living or a memory care setting tax deductible? Dave and John, I'll let you both kind of chime in on that question, because I know a lot of people want to know if, healthcare as a whole, we can write off on our taxes, but can we do that when we're utilizing a congregate living space?
Well, let's talk about I'll talk about the premiums first. There is some ability to be able first off, it depends upon the reason why you're in. If you're in assisted living, you have to be in there. If you want it to be tax deductible, you have to be it has to be a medical necessity that you're there. So in other words, if you're just in assisted living because you just don't want to be able to live, maybe it's not safe for you to live alone, but you can pretty much function on your own. That's not going to necessarily be viewed as being a medical necessity, and therefore it will not be deductible. Of course, I always say to talk with your tax advisor, but if you are in there and it's medically necessary, or if you're in a nursing home because you aren't able to perform the activities of daily living, or you have a cognitive impairment and you're in there, then your expenses for the facility that you're in, they are going to be tax deductible. Usually, in most of the cases, it's going to be expenses that are over and above 7.5% of your adjusted gross income. So I know when my mom was in such a memory care facility, we paid for that stuff, out of her IRA, and it was almost a dollar for dollar offset. Even though she was getting income, she was getting a deduction for it. So in her case, that was a tax deductible item.
Gotcha. And Dave, from a legal standpoint, I mean, is that something that you advise your clients on?
I don't advise clients on tax issues, such as tax deductions. I would, refer them to John or to their accountant or something like that. But just to go back to, earlier about, options for paying, as John mentioned, if you don't have long-term care insurance and you don't have the ability to pay out of your own resources, then Medicaid is a potential option. And John kind of talked about some of the drawbacks of that, because among other things, you basically have to spend all your resources before you'll qualify for that. However, there are some planning options that can be done to try to preserve some of your assets while still being able to qualify for Medicaid. However, a lot of times, that planning has to be done 5 years in advance. So, I certainly recommend, long-term care insurance as an option that everyone should explore if they're young enough and healthy enough that it's still viable. And I've certainly had many clients, be able to take a pre-existing life insurance policy that they had and convert that to one of these hybrid policies that John talked about, where you can also get a long-term care benefit through a policy that you already have.
Right. And I understand too, through our local area agency on aging, or sometimes it's community services boards, you can apply for what is called an auxiliary grant, bed placement. There's typically a waiting list, but though that will help come a time when you can no longer afford to stay in the assisted living setting that you are in, that is an option where they will step in and pay for some of the actual costs of the assisted living. So Alicia, as we're talking about different ways of funding our care, and I know many years ago, there was a lot of fear, anxiety, and bad publicity around reverse mortgages as a whole. Can you tell us a little bit about what a reverse mortgage is and what things look like in today's market?
Well, today's reverse mortgage is very, very different than it was 20 years ago. It is a highly regulated product that is government insured by the FHA. Essentially, reverse mortgage is a home equity line of credit. In Canada and Europe, they're called home annuities. So they allow you to access the equity in your home to help pay for retirement.
Okay. So if someone is, for example, wanting to look into a reverse mortgage, and that helps them basically right size, right? Choose that right size environment that's going to meet their care needs and help them continue to thrive and to age in the least restrictive environment. Are there qualifiers for reverse mortgages, or are there things that people need to know to be prepared? I mean, can a spouse go into an assisted living and one still stay in the home?
Those are great questions. You have to be 62 and older. It's best if your house is free and clear, but if you have over, I would say 55% equity in your home, a reverse mortgage is still a possibility. If you have one spouse that is healthy and still at home and the one that needs to go into managed care, that is still an option. We call that a non-borrowing spouse. So that would allow, say, like a husband to stay in the home and allow for him to care for his wife that might be in assisted living or memory care. So there are lots of different options. It can be used in a variety of different ways. Some people, I mean, for this particular talk, I think one of the best ways is to allow people to either stay at home, age at home in place, and be able to afford that safely and in-home healthcare, or, you know, address some of the other challenges with retirement and, you know, those things that come along with needing more healthcare, needing to make changes to the home so that it's safe for somebody to age in place. Or helping pay for a loved one to go into memory care.
Well, and that gives me a thought. If we defer back to kind of the first question about funding our care, right, and the pros and cons, as if we take a reverse mortgage, John, if there is a spouse that's moving into an assisted living or a memory care setting, one staying home, and they do take a reverse mortgage to help fund that care, are there investments that they could currently utilize to get kind of a return on that money to be able to make it stretch a little further?
Well, my understanding, and Alicia, if you tell me if I'm incorrect in my understanding, but you're just getting a monthly amount coming in on a reverse mortgage. Is that correct?
You can get a lump sum. You can set it up as like an annuity where you're getting a specific amount that is sent to you over the life of the loan. They can be set up in a variety of different ways.
So what we would do then in that case, depending on how they get the money, we would then look at it and say, all right, when do you have a need? And if somebody's going to have a need for something in the near future, we don't want to do anything that's very risky. So it's not that you cannot do something to make it a little bit longer, but I wouldn't think that you'd want to expose that to market risk. And if they're only bringing it in monthly, then it's probably not much of an opportunity there at all.
Got it. Okay. And so, Dave, as we look at kind of funding and making choices and how the costs are taken care of for a community, you know, the question comes up of making some of those financial decisions and making decisions for that next step for someone maybe with issues with cognition. You know, so what does it mean? Like we hear words like probate, conservatorship, guardianship. What do those things mean?
Yeah, so those three terms have one thing in common, and that is that they involve the court system. So these are the court supervised process that are available to deal with people who are either incapacitated, so they're still alive and can't, you know, make their own decisions, or, you know, for when someone's passed away and they have an estate that needs to be administered. So guardianship has to do with healthcare decisions and where is the person going to live. Conservatorship has to do with finances. So, you know, paying bills, managing bank accounts, buying and selling, you know, property, investments, that kind of thing. And then probate is, of course, when someone has passed away and there's an estate to be administered and bills to be paid off, and you know, hopefully there's something left to be distributed to the heirs or beneficiaries. So, you know, in all of those cases, you're going into court to have a judge decide who to appoint to those different positions. And so that can be time consuming, expensive, and create, you know, extra delays and burdens for, you know, family members.
So in your firm with estate planning, that helps establish interventions, right? So that we don't get to that point, like a medical power or a financial power of attorney, or and estate planning is going to include things like assets and decisions and advanced care planning options as well.
Correct. Yeah. So basically, our goal in estate planning is to avoid those court supervised things and therefore avoid the extra expense and hassle and delay that goes along with it. And so by having, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, wills, trusts, we can set things up so there's a plan in place, and you're able to pick who you want rather than relying on the court system to pick people.
Gotcha. Okay. So if I have a parent, a loved one that I feel is ready for a memory care setting, and we're looking at communities, do I need to have guardianship of that loved one, or is that something? Is there a time that I should step in? And I mean, is guardianship the right word, or is that truly like a power of attorney?
Right. So it could be either one. So if the parent has a power of attorney and they've named you, then you could use that power of attorney to, sign an agreement with a community and transfer funds to pay for the community. If the person has a medical power of attorney, also sometimes called advanced healthcare directive, then that would authorize the person named in there to, sort of make the decisions about types of care and where the person's going to live and that kind of thing. So those two documents combined together should allow you to take care of your parent that has that need. If they didn't, do that advanced planning, then you might have to go to court to become officially appointed as the guardian and or conservator for your parent in order to handle those things. And, for the reasons previously discussed, we typically are trying to avoid that.
Yeah. And so if I'm on the other end of that, I'm looking at trying to set things up so that my children can make decisions. I think sometimes we're afraid of putting in motion power of attorney or that advanced care planning documentation because you're concerned with who's going to make those decisions and are they going to follow your wishes. If it is written out and we come to a point where we're incapacitated, there are steps and interventions in place for our family to step in and help us. But if we don't feel that we're at that point, but the person that we assigned as a power of attorney does, then what happens?
If you have your mental capacity, you can, revoke your power of attorney or, make changes to it or, override any decisions that your authorized agent is making. So then, that I guess leads to the issue of, okay, well, what if there's a disagreement? So if there is a disagreement and, the child, thinks that the parent is incapacitated, but the parent doesn't agree, then you may end up having to go to court to, have it decided by a judge as to whether or not the parent is incapacitated. But generally, in the vast majority of cases, the older parents are happy to have their, child or spouse or friend or whoever else they've named, helping them out. The person doesn't have to be incapacitated for someone to be authorized under a power of attorney to assist them with their finances and, other things that they need help with. And, very often they're grateful to have, someone that they love and trust helping them with these things.
Right.
Hey, Dolores, can I make one comment also?
Sure.
One thing when it comes to these power of attorneys that I think some people really neglect of how important these things are is when you get them in place, know where they are. When I was down in Richmond years ago, and when I went to get my sister to bring her up to spend Thanksgiving with us, and long story short, she ended up in the hospital. Had to take her in, and when I was in there, they said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm her brother." And they said, well, we can't talk to you. And I said, yeah, you can. I'm her power of attorney. They said, well, you got to show it to us. Well, I had all that stuff securely online. Within 5 minutes, they had it. And I was able to step in and make decisions for her and help her out. So, sometimes people have these documents, they have it in a safe, and it doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you don't know where they are, you don't know how to access them. So to me, that's as important almost as having them. And I may have said, you agree with that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. So I often tell clients, if you put it in a safe, make sure someone else has the combination, because otherwise they won't be able to get it.
And this has been an issue too, whether, if you're in a community, they have your advanced care planning documentation in your medical record. But, if you're not in a community, the local fire department has something called a file of life that you can list emergency contacts, basic medical information, and you can tag if there are advanced care planning documents. For a lot of families that I've worked with, I've told them over the years to get a magnetic or to get a sleeve, right? Like an acetate that we put over our papers, put some magnets on it and put it on the refrigerator, a copy, not the originals, and absolutely a copy. But Inova actually, in one of their sprints to prepare for advanced care planning for their patient base, has started accepting faxes in to their electronic medical records that they will upload their advanced care planning documentation as well. So yes, I agree with you. And I think another point on that too is once we have those documents set up, we may have been completely proactive, but set them up 15 or 20 years ago. And there are tax law changes, there are inheritance law changes that happen all the time. And make sure that you're having those reviewed with an estate planning or an elder law attorney, with your financial advisor, to make sure that you still are in the parameters of the law. In the event that something happens to one or the other spouse, we may need to change some of that documentation. So thank you guys. I appreciate that. I think it's really good thoughts. So as we're looking through next steps, and we've talked about kind of how we fund, what are we looking at? If we've taken the financial steps to accumulate a really nice nest egg for retirement, are there long-term care events that can happen to us that just kind of wipe us out? I mean, it best laid plans, right? What does that look like, John, if we get to an event that we weren't anticipating?
Well, of course. I mean, you're looking at a long-term care event, and if we're talking about, some type of chronic illness, that's not going to be picked up, by whatever health insurance coverage you're on. So this is going to be more than likely an out-of-pocket expense. So absolutely a long-term care event. If you go into a nursing home, I mean, what's the average cost? $105,000, I think, in this area for a nursing home per year. If the average stay for, I think the average last I saw for a nursing home, the average stay for a male is about 2.5 years, and for a female is about 4. Not a lot of people can just write out a check for $400,000. So what can you do to help save some of those nest eggs that you've accumulated over time? There's a couple things. Obviously, go talk to David. I mean, there are elder care strategies that are out there that can be done. He mentioned earlier, if you do them 5 years in advance, in most cases that you need to have them done that far in advance in order for them to be protected. But there are strategies that you can use there. The other thing is if in addition to that, we mentioned earlier about having long-term care insurance. If you have traditional long-term care, such as in the state of Virginia, they have what's called a partnership policy. And what a partnership policy will do, as long as you meet for it to be partnership eligible, there's only a few minor requirements. And let's just say that the policy that you have is designed to pay $500,000 over 5 or 6 years, just as an example. Well, if you have that in place in a partnership policy, by the way, if you take it in Virginia, which is a partnership state, and you move to another state, and it's also a partnership state, it'll carry over. They'll honor it. But here's what'll happen: instead of having to spend down, and what's it now, Dave, $2,000 to spend down to get required for Medicare. Well, if you're long-term care for Medicaid, thank you. Yeah, if you have $500,000 in a traditional long-term care partnership policy, you only have to spend down to $502,000. Okay, they will let you keep that. Now, that's if you have traditional long-term care. Some of the hybrid policies are the ones that deal with riders on life insurance. They're not partnership eligible, but there are ways to go and set things up that way, in addition to, like I said, talking to David and talking about some elder care strategies.
Gotcha. And we have actually a couple questions here. So Ella said most assisted living facilities have limited AG beds. How do you find an AG bed in your area when money runs out, or who can help with this task? I would say contact your local area agency on aging. When they have a list of, there's a list that you can be put on for an auxiliary grant, and please do not wait until you get to that financial indigency level to apply, because there are waiting lists. But they should also be able to supply you with who they have contracts with in each county that has auxiliary grant beds available, because it's something that community would have had to have applied for and become eligible to host the auxiliary grant beds. If you reach out by county, like I said, to the Area Agency on Aging, they should give you a list. We have an anonymous question that says, many life care facilities have a 600,000 plus entry fee for couples plus monthly costs, but if we're 80 and die at 85, we've lost a huge sum. What is the option? Refundable entry fees are even higher, and refundability goes to 0 in 3 to 4 years. So with the question truly is, to me, applying to a continued care retirement community, a CCRC, right? Where you have a buy-in option. Not all retirement communities are going to be that continued care retirement community. And if you're going in at 80 or 85, and you're expecting, for it to carry you through the continuum of care, whether it goes from assisted living to memory care, or you do need that skilled nursing placement, that is the goal of a continued care retirement community. Now, you are correct, and John and Dave, you can please feel free, Alicia, to chime in on this. A lot of people, that was a very popular model in the 80s, early 90s. A lot of people did not see that they felt that their money and their level of care actually one weighed out with the other. So there is not, in most instances, a return on investment. In other words, if you passed away, there's nothing that goes back to your children, I believe. And as well, if you don't stay for an extended period of time, most people go in an independent living in their 50s or 60s, and they carry through that continued care retirement community, and they feel like it met their needs and it justified the expense, which is why there are so many monthly rental communities like Kensington, so that basically you're on a month-to-month lease. So as things change, or you need to elevate your level of care, you have a rental that you change, but you don't have necessarily a buy-in. You may have a community fee that you pay initially to take care of maintenance fees. Oh Lord have mercy, I lost my thought. The painting, the carpet, the replacing of the appliances, making sure that the community stays presentable, money that goes into activities for the whole community. That community fee is a one-time, where you have a monthly rental, and what you'll see is a fair market rate increase, because that happens in the state of Virginia. It's a real estate law, but you will not have a continued changing expense or a large buy-in, basically just a monthly rental and a level of care. John and Dave, do you have anything you want to add to that, or Alicia?
I would just say, there are a lot of different options out there, and it seems like there's more and more, opening up all the time. And so I would, consult with someone that's very knowledgeable about what all the different options are. And, I know there's, several different people that I know that specialize in helping people find the right fit. And so I think that would be a good option to explore, because, there is so much variation in, what's available and different ways to pay for it, or, how their fees are structured.
Right. All right. Well, and so if we go the route, say, of a long-term care policy, and we talked about kind of the longevity of those policies and it being able to pay for both an assisted living or a memory care placement, you can also utilize a long-term care policy prior to entering a community to put home care in place to help you get ready, right? To transition into a congregate setting, to travel back and forth with a caregiver, to learn the community, to help you pack and downsize. It's kind of like a welcome while you wait program. And that also gives you the opportunity to kind of get through that elimination period with minimal cost versus having 90 days in a community of out-of-pocket expense before the policy kicks in. John, do you think that sounds like a good plan?
Well, it can. You really have to make sure you read what kind of long-term care policy you've had. I have seen some long-term care policies that say once you qualify for not being able to meet 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living, the waiting period starts, even if you're at the house and you haven't incurred an expense. I've seen others that said you have to have 90 days worth of expenses. And I actually knew one person that had a person come in 1 day a week to help them. So they actually had to wait 90 months. 90 weeks before this thing would take into account, because they only had one person coming in just 1 day a week, to help them out. So it just depends on how the policy is worded. But if you do have one that does pick up and starts paying, absolutely. And some people they want the option to maybe to have as much care as they can at home, but then when it gets to a point where it's just not feasible, then it can transition. And if you've been incurring the expense at your house, then you're already met the elimination period, so that when you go into a facility, it's already in force for you.
Okay, so Alicia, if we're not utilizing long-term care, if we're looking at, a reverse mortgage as an alternative to help us fund our care, or even the sale of our home, what happens to the house after someone dies with a reverse mortgage?
That's a great question. So the most important thing to remember is it is always your house. It's always your house. When the last person on title were to leave the house permanently, go into long-term care permanently, or dies, the family has about 6 months to decide what they would like to do with the house. Okay, there should always be equity left over. With a home, a reverse mortgage, you can't access all the equity in your house, but you can, depending on age, access a significant portion. So that there will be, if mom is living at home and she decides that at some point that she needs to go into a facility, she has, at that point, she can sell her house if she would like to, and she still will have all of the leftover equity plus any appreciation will go to her as soon as the loan is paid back. Same thing with the family. Loan gets paid back, everything else goes to the estate or the heirs.
Gotcha. And then that's where Dave would come in to make sure that the paperwork is fairly distributing, right, the assets. Got it.
And usually the house is sold, but if the family did decide they wanted to keep the house in the family, they would just refinance the loan amount in their name and they keep the house.
So the executive that's set up through Dave would handle that. So like if I have a power of attorney, right? And I've assigned one of my children, when is the right time for me to enact that? Like, Dave, I know we talked a little bit about this earlier, but do you get to choose when is it a standing document that, I can basically utilize them as I go through? Or is it, does it come to a point where it says, if I hit this point, then you can step in?
Yeah, great question. So it depends. So I guess, first of all, let me talk about medical powers of attorney or healthcare directives. Those pretty much all are dependent on, if they say, if I'm incapacitated and not able to make my own medical decision, here's who I want to make my medical decision for me. And, in that medical context, you're already going to be dealing with doctors. And so it'll be sort of a part of the process automatically that the doctor is going to, ask you what you want done if you're able, because they have to get informed consent if you're able to give it. And only if they determine that you're not capable of making an informed decision are they going to then go to your named healthcare agents. So in the general or financial power of attorney, those can be written in a few different ways. So one way is effective immediately. So you sign it and it's, activated. It's a live document. It can be used at any time, right away. Now the person doesn't have to do anything. They can just, wait until later, if and when they ever need to do something, but it's, under the terms of the document, it's effective immediately. Another way they can be written is this power of attorney only goes into effect in the event I'm incapacitated. So in that case, then, it's limited and it only becomes activated when the person's incapacitated. So some people like that because they, feel like it protects them from having their agent, run around and do something, while they still have their faculties. But on the other hand, the drawback to that is that, if your person is taking the power of attorney down to the bank or somewhere trying to do something, if it says in there, this is only good if I'm incapacitated, then that's going to potentially lead to the question, how do I know that this person's incapacitated and you're allowed to, be here transacting business for them? And so generally we're trying to avoid, all these snags and delays and, things like that. So there's a trade-off there. And then there's also a third, kind of in between option is if your power of attorney says it's only if I'm incapacitated, we can also put in there that you have the option to sort of activate it at a future date by signing a statement saying, I hereby activate my power of attorney. So if you're not comfortable having it be effective immediately, that gives you, say 5 years from now, you decide, I'm still capable of, functioning and making decisions and managing my affairs, but I would like to have my son or daughter or whoever, step in and act as my power of attorney, even though I'm still mentally competent. So I can sign that activation document, and that, will allow the person to act.
Gotcha. Okay. So as we go back to a few of our questions, if someone is in a crisis state and they must move to an assisted facility within a year or less, is there an opportunity then to protect assets? So, crisis could mean a multitude of things, but if we need to move fairly quickly, to move someone into a congregate setting, an assisted living or a memory care environment, John, how do we protect assets? Dave, how do we get that documentation that may not be in place in order on an emergency basis?
I'll start off. But you're gonna need some creativity from David, for that to happen. Especially if you're dealing with somebody that ultimately they have X amount of assets, and if they don't have 5 years from the time the crisis comes up, they're gonna have a hard time hiding it from a Medicaid standpoint. Okay, but if you have a community spouse. There are a couple things you can do. Community spouse being one that's not having the crisis, one that's not going to be inside of assisted living. There are some additional provisions that you can do to help. You have them have additional income, and there are some it's like a longevity annuity. It's a thing that they can get where you can put a certain amount of the assets could be protected in that kind of case, but it's pretty minimal. But most of it's going to be the creativity from David.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and no, I agree with everything John just said. It's going to be, the options are limited, but that's not to say there's none whatsoever. And certainly, if there's a spouse that is not in the crisis situation, that helps a lot. I think just for the practical level, even putting aside the the Medicaid qualification issue, there's just all the regular, planning for, what's going to happen to my estate upon my death, and, and who's going to make my decisions for me now. So if the person previously, did some estate planning and they have a power of attorney, that's going to be helpful because, depending on how the power of attorney is written, it may authorize that agent to engage in some of these planning steps. If they didn't have any power of attorney at all, then, if they're still able legally to, understand and sign one, they should do that right away. Because otherwise it may be too late, and then you're stuck going back to court to get a guardian appointed or a conservator or that kind of thing. And then same thing with creating a will or a trust. If that hasn't already been done, just your regular estate planning, aside from any Medicaid qualification issues, are important to be done. And, depending on the person's cognitive capacity at the time and, what documents they already have from before, it's going to have a big impact on what can be done.
Well, and I'm a fan of the starting point too, being like a 5 wishes document. The 5 wishes is something that you can get fairly easy. It's a starting point for a lot of this conversation of what are my wishes, what is the plan, who am I going to appoint? But it's also a notarizable document through a notary that can be utilized, and instead for an advance directive as a starting point in an emergent basis until you can get to an estate planning attorney or an elder law attorney to sit down and kind of go through those documents. It also opens up dialogue to have conversations, and for us, before we start this conversations, to look through it and kind of think, who do I want to appoint, right? What do I want as far as life-sustaining treatments? And if an elder law attorney is not a viable option, there are post orders in the state of Virginia, a physician's order of life-sustaining treatment. That basically you walk through your wishes with your physician and they sign off, and it is a medical order that is put into place to honor your healthcare decisions. And in most instances, medical crisis, you may have a medical power of attorney, but a post order is a physician's order, and it's going to be followed before a medical power of attorney, which is kind of crazy. But a doctor's order will supersede because it's in place during that healthcare crisis. So other questions that we had, and please, if you do have questions, put them into the Q&A. What agencies specialize in home care for someone with dementia? There are quite a few agencies out there that do home care. Capital City Nurses, we've been providing in-home care now for 45 years. So we have caregivers that have worked with our elder population for a very long time and work with varying degrees of dementia. There are a lot of disease processes that can compound dementia. There are specifics like an Alzheimer's or a Lewy body or a frontal lobe dementia. It's really just dependent on the patient and what looks good from a home care setting. Like with Capital City Nurses, you should have a nursing assessment that basically comes out and talks through options and where you are at. The same thing with the community. For example, if you were choosing to go to memory care in the Kensington, they would do an assessment to put a care plan together to meet your needs. Through that care plan, they match you with the appropriate level of care and provider. So we have extensive experience with dementia, with Alzheimer's, with different forms, dealing with behaviors and putting interventions in place to make sure that someone does stay safe and in the least restrictive environment. But I would also advise home care is a good option until we are starting to elope. If we are exit seeking or we are wandering, home may not necessarily be the safest place for a person with an advanced form of dementia, because there is no possible way for you to have eyes on you 24/7. And even if you have a caregiver in the home, they're going to have to utilize the restroom. They're going to have to prepare a meal. There is going to be time where they're going to have to leave someone unattended to take care of needs that they have. So, be very selective with who you choose. Ask the hard questions. Ask if there's any formal dementia training, if they are utilizing certified caregivers, but again, I would encourage you to visit the Kensington and talk to someone about a memory care setting if your loved one is exit seeking or wandering. So, are financial powers of attorneys different from medical power of attorneys? That is our next question. And
yes, yeah, they are. Typically in Virginia, we have what are called advanced healthcare directives or advanced medical directives, which include a medical power of attorney component, which is naming the person that you want to make your medical decisions if you're not able to. And then also oftentimes will include end-of-life care instructions. So if I'm in a persistent vegetative state or have a terminal condition, do I want to, be kept alive on life support, or do I want to have those life support measures withdrawn and be allowed to die naturally? So that's the medical stuff is kind of in its own separate document, and then the financial stuff is usually going to be contained in a general power of attorney, which is, covers managing bank accounts, selling real estate, pretty much any kind of financial decision or any other non-medical decision that, may come up.
okay. And I know one of the other questions that comes up quite often, and John, I'll direct this one to you. When is it too late to get a long-term care policy? Like, is there a maximum age that you can apply for a policy? Is it based on a disease process or a comorbidity? Like, if I am 80 years old and I have no diagnosis, right, of any chronic disease, am I eligible for a long-term care policy?
Depends on the carrier. And it's very carrier specific. One thing that was very interesting was that during COVID, they lowered the maximum age down by about 10 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was actually down to about 70 years old. Most of them will allow you to apply as you get close to 80. Obviously, the thing you're going to run into is at 80, you have the chance to have more issues that would make you not eligible for the policy. I can tell you this, that statistically, the most long-term care policies are sold to people in their 50s or 60s. A lot of that is just because the ones in their 50s have just gone through this with their parents and they've seen what's happened, and they're much more motivated to say, I don't want that to happen to me or have my kids have to go through what I just went through. But statistically, you'll find people in their mid 50s to maybe early 60s as the sweet spot, if you want to call it that, when most people consider taking this kind of policy out.
But you can take them as low as 25, 30 years old.
Sure, you can. Yeah, you can. It just depends upon what you're going to look at. I mean, some of these hybrid policies and ones that have like riders on life insurance policies, probably the better option there. That when it comes to especially what's happened to the traditional long-term care policy and what's happened with premiums potentially, it's not always prudent to go take those kind of policies. But the good thing is you at least have got something, you've protected your insurability, so you do have it. You've eliminated the risk that you would not be able to be eligible for one because of some type of illness or issue that would no longer make you qualify.
Gotcha. So if we don't qualify, but we're looking into the reverse mortgage, Alicia, do you have to stay residing in your home? Like, for example, could I take out a reverse mortgage on my home and then move into the Kensington and rent my home?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
In order to have a reverse mortgage, it has to be your primary home. Has to be your primary home. Now, as long as somebody on title is living in that home, even if the other spouse is in managed care, you of course can do that. And you have to be what they consider to be your primary residence is you're spending 6 months and 1 day in your home. So
Okay.
sometimes there'll be people that will go into managed care for a little bit, they'll come home, they'll go back into managed care for a little bit, they'll come home. Once they come back home, that time also restarts. So you have a good amount of flexibility when it comes to going in and out, but it does have to be on your primary residence.
Okay, so what happens if you have a reverse mortgage and then you end up going into the hospital and you're going to need long-term skilled nursing, right? Or you're a memory care situation and home is no longer safe. I mean, can a family member step in on your behalf or?
To move into the residence? No. The last person on title, once they leave the home, then the loan the family would have to start making some decisions about what they would like to do with the home.
But they would have the option to refinance or to purchase out.
They could refinance. There's also one of the great features about a reverse mortgage, other than you don't have a monthly payment, is there is a line of credit growth rate on that. So it's 5% over prime. So if you get a reverse mortgage sooner and allow that to grow, you'll have a much larger amount of money that you can use to maybe deal with a crisis or transition that loved one into managed care.
Gotcha.
Before selling the home.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists, right? Guys, I think this was really informative and I think it was a lot of really good information. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave anybody with?
I'll just say thank you very much to the Kensington for putting this on, and Dolores for moderating, and for everyone who attended. Thank you for your attention.
And I'll second that and just say, you know, I would always encourage anybody, just have a plan. You know, don't have to make a decision when it's the crisis. Okay. So there's a lot of resources, and this is what I love about, you know, what all of us here in this do. We're all here to go and willing to help anybody to need time to help prepare for those future events.
Great. Thank you all so much. I do want to say thank you to everyone for joining tonight and hanging in the beginning when I was figuring out those technical difficulties. Thanks for your patience and hanging in there. We want to thank our speakers again for just taking the time to be with us this evening and sharing such useful and insightful information. As a reminder, I do just want to let everybody know who is attending. You will be sent a recording of this event along with the speaker's contact information if you'd like to get in touch regarding any of their services. So thank you all again and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, the Kensington.
Bye, guys. Thank you.